Hello viewers, welcome to my review for the second season of Code Geass. Once again, there will be spoilers. If you're here for Season 2, I'd imagine you've already seen Season 1, or at the very least my review of Season 1. Generally, when I review a series with multiple seasons, nothing is off limits from the previous one. But there's also just an abundance of things I want to talk about now that I've seen the show all the way through to the end, so nothing from Season 2 is safe either. So if you haven't already seen it, and you think hearing about all the major plot points beforehand might ruin the experience, I'll skip ahead to say that Code Geass is definitely worth your time. Go watch it, and then you can always come back to hear what I thought about it later. From its very first episode, Code Geass always had a million things going on at once, and it hasn't slowed down at all in Season 2. I really want to just jump right in, but I have to step back just a little. At the end of the last season, the Black Knights started their big battle to take over Tokyo, setting up their headquarters at Ashford Academy, and for a while everything was going great. But then V2, the mysterious boy who explained Geass to Suzaku, and who we've seen is working with Charles, the Emperor, kidnaps Nonnally, and of course Lelouch drops everything to go save her. This pursuit takes him to the island where they'd previously found the old Geass relics, tailed by Colin and Suzaku, and with their commander suddenly missing in action, things start falling apart for the Black Knights back in Tokyo. This is where Suzaku finally corners him, and Lelouch's identity is finally revealed, to these two anyway. And then everyone's on the verge of losing it, and they've all got guns, and Season 1 ends on one of those awful cliffhangers where you hear the shot go off, but don't get to see who or what it hits. And it's only during the next season where we get to revisit that memory and see that it didn't actually hit anyone. It just set off the battle. Suzaku easily overpowers Lelouch and drags him in front of the Emperor, who is revealed to have a Geass of his own, which he uses to rewrite Lelouch's memory, along with the memories of many of his friends, leaving him to believe he's just an ordinary schoolboy. Which is where the season actually starts off, with Lelouch back at Ashford being followed around by a boy named Rolo, who's been assigned to watch him for signs of his memory coming back, and who everyone believes is his younger brother. Nonnally was one of the things the Emperor took from his memories, and though it's never actually stated, I like to believe that Rolo played another role too. His sister was such a big part of who Lelouch was that I feel like there being nothing to fill that spot in his life may have eventually been enough of a trigger on its own for his memories to start returning, because they do have Valletta stationed in the school too, as a teacher. Obviously someone who was literally living with him could keep a closer eye on him anyway, but I really liked the inclusion of Rolo too. It just fit very nicely. Anyway, about a year has passed, and after losing to Britannia a second time, Japan is in worse shape than ever. Zero's been declared dead to the world, but the Black Knights are still operating in secret under C2's guidance. And of course her primary objective is to retrieve Lelouch, so when he and Rolo sneak off to this fancy casino, with Lelouch up to his old chess gambling tricks, the Black Knights attack, and the two boys get separated in the chaos. What followed was actually a little off-putting at first. It's weird looking back after all the big reveals and emotions of the end, but the beginning, and certain things all the way through, honestly, was a little repetitive. Like, it reached a point where I actually went to compare the staff lists between the seasons, and it's all the same people. I think they brought on one more storyboard person or something, and that was literally the only change, but for a while it felt like the writers were a little lost. No one was out of character or anything, but it felt like they'd brought on a whole new team that was just trying to recreate the success of the first. It was basically exactly what I'd been worried about when I heard there was going to be a time skip that reset the story a bit. It was just a little too much time spent backtracking over past events for my liking. C2 manages to get to him, showing off her immortality again, and she both reawakens his Geass and fixes his memories, with very little trouble. And I mean, it sounds crazy now to even suggest one more element to add to this already complicated story, but I did think it would have been an interesting complication if his memories were a little hazy for a while longer. Anyway, this confrontation plays out just like their first one. Lelouch gets out of the situation by Geassing the soldiers into killing themselves, and he takes up his role as Zero again, rescuing the Black Knights who were captured and setting his plan into motion once more. And the issue of the spy really isn't an issue for long. Rolo is... well, I wouldn't be surprised to learn he's not a very popular character, but I really like Rolo. He also has a Geass power that allows him to briefly stop time, or rather stop people's perception of time, and where he got it will become important later, but the big thing now is that his mission was to kill Lelouch if he ever regained his memories and Zero reawakened. Thankfully, we get some insight into Rolo right away because he doesn't seem fazed by this at all. Basically, Rolo was raised to be the perfect little mindless assassin. It's all he's ever known. He got some really good lines describing it, how no one counts the number of times they've ever brushed their teeth or eaten a meal. That's how mundane killing has become to him. But he's also never really had to do a long stretch undercover like this. His Geass gives him the perfect ability to slip in, kill the target, and slip back out without anyone being any the wiser. And he's never known any family, so we see him worrying early on about being able to believably play the part while he keeps watch. But if there was any one wholesome trait about Lelouch, it's that he's a very loving older brother. Seeing the way he acts with Rolo only furthered my belief that, with Nonali gone, that love needed to be transferred onto someone, or else the amnesia would have fallen apart. And about a year has passed since Season 1. They have spent a lot of time together. Even knowing it's all fake, Rolo's become very attached to this role. He's just too sad and young and lonely for me to dislike. It is far too easy for Lelouch to convince him that, though it was all based on a lie, the emotions were real. So he's safely secured Rolo's loyalty, and all I could hope at that point was that the emotions would become real by the story's end. Meanwhile, Suzaku was rewarded for capturing Lelouch by being made a Knight of the Round, one of 12 elite warriors who report directly to the Emperor. And I have to say, this was the first time Suzaku's plans really made sense to me. Like, I got all his talk of wanting to change the system from the inside, but it was always just too naive and idealistic to sound possible. But the top-ranked knight gets to request one area to have control over, so if Suzaku can climb the ranks and become the Knight of One, he'll effectively have won back Japan. But in the meantime, now that Zero's reappeared, he returns to school as well, even though he's attending fewer classes than ever, to try and determine whether it's an imposter. And his big attempt to catch Lelouch in his lie is probably one of my favorite scenes in the show, as minor as it ends up being. Suzaku tells him a new viceroy is on their way and wants to talk to him, and when he takes the phone, it's Nonali on the other end of the line. Luckily, Rolo's lurking in the doorway and freezes Suzaku just long enough for Lelouch to tell her he loves her and that she needs to play along while he pretends not to know her. Lelouch is such a meticulous planner. I just love any time he loses his cool because something's caught him off guard. But not so much that I want his plans to actually fall apart, so Rolo coming in for the last-minute save was great too. This certainly throws a wrench in his plans. He can't exactly overthrow this viceroy. His entire motivation was to keep her safe and create an ideal world for her where she could be happy. And when their mission to kidnap her fails, Nonali announces that she plans to revive Euphemia's project to create a special zone of Japan where everyone has equal rights. Which, as you could probably imagine, garners no support after the massacre last time. That is, until Zero announces that the Black Knights will back this plan. You know, a lot of my favorite scenes weren't the big decisive battles, but the little tactical moments. In exchange for their support, Zero negotiates that he will be the only one punished for their past crimes, and that his punishment will be that he's sent into exile. The day arrives and all the Black Knights, undercover of course, fill the stadium, but Zero won't show himself until it's confirmed over the broadcast that they'll be sending Zero into exile. And then the stadium is filled with smoke, and when it all dies down, all the Black Knights have dressed up as Zero. But as long as they remain peaceful, the Britannians have to respond in kind. They don't want to be responsible for another unprovoked massacre, and it'll look bad if they went back on the agreement they just televised to the world. So ultimately, the Black Knights are given a free pass to go set up base on an island off of the Chinese Federation, who they then help resist Britannia and overthrow their tyrant rulers, gathering even more support from other countries looking for freedom. And I don't mean to suggest the moment was unimportant. I loved the scene because it was fun and clever, but the whole "we are all Zero" thing, reinforcing the idea that Zero is a symbol and not one specific person, becomes a huge deal later on. This is where it feels like the story starts to split for me. Like, I know the actual war and all the Geass happenings are very related, but they feel separate. Though I think I've realized why that is. Britannia's path in the war has been taken over almost completely by Schneisel at this point, the second prince, who I'm not sure I even mentioned in my first review, probably because, on top of only showing up pretty close to the end, he just never seemed as threatening as Cornelia. Schneisel's greatest strength is knowing how to bide his time. He's very mild-tempered. He never shows any animosity towards the people they're conquering, not like we've seen from just about every other Britannian military leader so far. Schneisel struck me as the type of person who's never known any different, but is aware that all the propaganda is just another tactic. War is just a way of life for Schneisel. But besides being a lot less emotional about it, the series draws a lot of parallels between Schneisel and Lelouch. The older prince is also shown to be a tactical genius, and they view battles the same way, like a chess match. Anyway, the longer Season 2 goes on, the harder it is to contact the Emperor, until Charles finally tells Schneisel to basically just do whatever he wants, that the war is of no importance to him anymore. This was the real shift, because of course Lelouch is going after Charles, so his focus moves to discovering the secrets of Geass too. Which brings us back to Rolo, actually. He didn't make his Geass contract the normal way, if there is such a thing. The Empire has been studying Geass for some time now. Charles made his contract with V2 back when he was a child. Rolo grew up in a laboratory, where they've been experimenting on children, implanting them with Geass and studying the different effects. Lelouch destroys the research facility, along with everyone inside, and finds another of those big Geass temple doorways, which leads him to this other dimension we've been seeing Charles in. And I did really like finally seeing them face to face. Lelouch is immediately very intimidated by him, for all his fighting to get to this point. But honestly, as much as I did like this first confrontation, it was overshadowed by finally learning about C2's past. Years and years ago, what looked like medieval times to me, C2 was just a regular orphan, struggling to survive. She was taken in by a nun, who granted her a Geass power that caused everyone she used it on to love her, and so she went from having nothing and living on the streets to having the people of their little village literally worship her, starting a sort of cult around her. But then the nun determines that she's mastered her Geass sufficiently enough to finally fulfill her end of their contract, forcing her immortality on her. There was a scene between Lelouch and C2 at the end of the last season that I really liked, where he's forced to relive all of her deaths over the years. I kinda called it then. What she wants from their contract is to actually die. She has a great line about how life without death can't really be considered living at all. And on the flip side of things, Charles wanted the immortality from V2 and succeeds in getting it, so Lelouch's attempt to kill his father fails this time around. Meanwhile, things are kind of falling apart with the Black Knights. The cracks in that trust were already there. They didn't all immediately forgive him for running out on them back in their Tokyo battle, something he never gave an adequate explanation for. I'm sure it doesn't help either that Colin, who was his biggest supporter, spends a good chunk of this season captured by Britannia. And now there's the matter of the Geass facility, which they were told was a military base, but was all unarmed scientists and test subjects. He has succeeded in bringing together all the nations not under Britannian control, but even this could present a new problem. In order to get them all to agree to work together, they had to put aside their own militaries and consent to using just one united force, led by the Black Knights. Which sounds great, but now, with only two major powers at play, whoever comes out on top will effectively rule the whole world, which no one really wants. At this point, there's too much momentum behind this thing for even Lelouch to influence it that much, and the Black Knights reclaiming Japan doesn't promise good things for the current viceroy. So with no one left to turn to, he contacts Suzaku and begs him to save her, no matter the cost. And there is just so much to talk about here. Lelouch's mindset was a really interesting thing to me this season, and I'll come back for that too, because we're coming up on the scene where a lot of those points really hit home for me. The really painful thing here is that I don't think Lelouch even really had to ask. Suzaku obviously cares a lot for Nanali too, and I'm sure he would have done everything in his power to save her anyway. But long story short, the conversation was already going badly before Schneisel shows up and reveals he was spying on the whole thing, which means he now knows Zero's identity for sure and all about his Geass. And there isn't really a better time to talk about Suzaku. There were two major things he wanted to learn from this talk with Lelouch. Why he made Yuffie do what she did, and why he used his Geass to save Suzaku himself. It was a very simple command, to live, but it didn't deactivate after that particular fight. Now, and presumably for the rest of Suzaku's life, anytime he's in danger, it forces him to do everything within his power to save himself. That might sound unnecessary to some of you, but the thing is, Suzaku never really got over killing his father. He believed his father's death would put an immediate stop to the war, and of course it didn't, but he was 10 and surrounded by all this death and destruction, and here was the most powerful man in the country about to command his people to never surrender under any circumstances. He truly believes that the only way to atone for this is to give his own life, preferably in his pursuit to fix the world, and now takes this Geass command as a personal affront. Which, of course, wasn't the intention. It felt very much like a spur-of-the-moment, I don't want my friend to die command to me. But with this path now unavailable to him, Suzaku has to rethink his goals a little. Unfortunately, this will only come after the current battle. This world's version of the atom bomb has been created, and they put Suzaku in a position where he has to use it, basically wiping Tokyo from the face of the planet, and leaving Lelouch as an empty shell of a person when he thinks Nanali got caught up in the blast. Schneisel takes this opportunity to meet with the Black Knights, revealing that their savior, Zero, is actually just another Britannian prince, and telling them just enough about Geass to plant that seed of doubt that he's been brainwashing them this whole time. Which leads us into the final, well, maybe like second to last stage. I swear, I knew this was going to be a long one, but even just summing it up, this season feels twice as long as it actually was. Schneisel signs a ceasefire with the Black Knights and starts his plans to overthrow his father, which is also what Suzaku's after now, and which is all that Lelouch still cares about. So the boys are finally, mostly on the same side, when they travel back to that Geass dimension and confront Charles. A wrench is thrown into their plans, though, when Lelouch's mother shows up, very much still alive, and not at all concerned for what her children have gone through. There were already some suspicious things about Marianne at this point. things about the day she died that weren't adding up, and some vague scenes where C2 seemed to be communicating with Marianne telepathically. We learn now that she also made a contract with C2, years before she ever met Charles, but it was only activated in the moments of her death, which was orchestrated by V2, who thought she was getting in the way of his contract with Charles. Marianne's Geass allowed her to transfer her soul into Anya, a young girl who was staying with them for etiquette training, who just happened to see the whole thing, and who later grew up to be a Knight of the Round, and who definitely wasn't explored enough, given her role in one of the biggest reveals in the series. And so we've finally come to Marianne and Charles's big plans. Up until now, we've heard him ranting about how he's going to kill God, which we learn now is another name for this dimension, which is also known as C's world. Basically, this parallel realm is the collective unconscious of humankind's thoughts and memories and emotions. Charles and Marianne are planning to use this world to basically become all-powerful. Time would stop. The past and the present would blend together. They try to win over Suzaku by telling him he could be with Yuffie again. And everyone would think and feel the same. And honestly, I was a little disappointed that the two who should have been our final villains turned out to be so childish. I get where they were coming from. When Charles was growing up, there was this constant struggle for the throne, with one person gaining power only to be stabbed in the back by someone they trusted. His contract with V2 was technically to create a world without lies. Forcing one big mind and existence meld is one way of putting an end to all the conflict, I guess. I just feel like Charles hasn't grown up at all since then. Like, why do these two messed up teenagers have a better sense of how to build a peaceful world than the two adults? And granted, the only reason Lelouch and Suzaku are finally able to work together is because they've both been so broken down by this point, but they both know this isn't the way to go about it. In the end, Lelouch doesn't need to outsmart them. He appeals to the world itself, and the collective desires of its people rule that they don't want to be taken over by the will of just one person, and it erases them instead. I really liked the callback here to C2's point about death. It parallels really nicely with this point, that a world without change isn't really in existence at all. And while I kind of hated that Lelouch's parents seemed so naive, it made them pretty non-threatening, honestly. I did love what this scene did for Lelouch's character. I'd noticed it a few times throughout this season, but Lelouch started to strike me as seeming very young. Or maybe just acting his age, finally. There's no question at this point that he's a genius, but emotionally, Lelouch is very immature. There's a scene where Shirley tells him that love makes people powerful, which of course he relates back to all that he's willing to do for Nonnally, but he treats it like some grand revelation, like he didn't realize he was being motivated by love this whole time. And then there's his conversation with Suzaku. Prior to thinking his sister's dead, it's Lelouch's lowest moment, reduced to a point where he's willing to beg and take whatever abuse Suzaku wants to throw at him if it'll protect Nonnally. But even then, he doesn't answer any of Suzaku's questions. Not honestly, anyway. It holds no tactical advantage to stick to his line about how he used Yuffie on purpose. If anything, it'd make Suzaku less likely to help him. It's just such a defense mechanism. Lelouch has been dancing on the edge of insanity for so long. There are some things he just can't acknowledge without losing his grip completely. And the reveal of his parents' plan was where Lelouch's youth was at its most front and center for me. Marianne and Charles tried to tell him they were doing all this for their children, but he sees right through that. They've always put themselves first, sending Lelouch and Nonnally off to some war-torn country without any sort of safeguard. Lelouch's truest self is that of a hurt, abandoned child, and I loved that. That sort of character really speaks to me. And so Lelouch has finally managed to defeat his father, but he and Suzaku do have to return to the real world, which is still a mess, so they hatch one last plan. And now we are finally at the end, and this may be the only part I'm able to keep brief, because it was kind of rushed. Honestly, these last 4 episodes felt like they should have been a 3rd season. They get all the major story points out, but much more quickly than I was used to from this series, and that extra time could have been used to flesh out some of the other characters. With Charles gone, Lelouch usurps the throne, with Suzaku acting as his knight, and Geass everyone in the royal city into recognizing him as the rightful emperor. He goes on to take over literally the entire world, establishing himself as the worst dictator in history. Schneisel was his biggest opposition, revealing that they had saved Nonnally also, who now knew the truth about everything. Speaking of Lelouch's lying being a defense mechanism, that was another great scene. He tells her that he wasn't ever doing this for her sake, he just wanted the power and revenge. And his voice is steady, but she can't see his hands are shaking. I could not be more pleased with what they did with Nonnally. Like, it was always this unspoken thing that she wouldn't approve of Lelouch's way of doing things, but she was really more doll than person in Season 1. The only time anything important happens involving Nonnally, it's her getting kidnapped. But as soon as she's given a position of power, she did strike me as someone capable of leading. She stresses that it was her choice to be sent back to Japan, and though she was definitely seen as someone who'd be easy to manipulate, she's honestly shown to have more of a backbone than Euphemia did for most of her time in the country. It made the whole thing a little more sad, actually. Seeing this version of Nonnally who not only had opinions, but was willing to fight for them. Lelouch lectured Charles about forcing his own ideals on others while basically doing the exact same thing himself. I know he wanted to protect Nonnally, but he had to know she was going to get caught up in it at some point. If he'd trusted her more and actually listened to what she wanted, things might have gone down a little differently. But then that's a point I can go around in mental circles on, because there is more than just Nonnally's happiness at stake, and the actual conclusion is better for the whole world. So, Lelouch has established himself as this terrible demon emperor dictator. Suzaku is believed to be dead from a previous battle, but that was all part of the plan too. Now, during a procession of some sort, where everyone can see and fully appreciate how much they hate their current ruler, he suddenly shows up as Zero, and the whole world watches as Zero kills Emperor Lelouch, taking up his place as a symbol for justice once more. And the storytelling in Season 2 had a few issues throughout. Some of it was rushed, especially near the end. Some of it was unnecessarily repetitive, especially near the beginning, and there were quite a few characters who are never sufficiently explored. But the ending was perfect. For all of Lelouch's complicated plans, this last one was actually quite simple. He made the world appreciate what it could be by giving them all a common enemy, and neutralizing all the other major threats beforehand. And it just made for one hell of a visual. Nonnally wailing over her brother's body while the rest of the world celebrates his death, entirely unable to appreciate what he's done for them. And it does that thing where it flashes back to the 3 of them as children, when they were happy and mostly innocent, which I have such a weakness for. Code Geass can definitely be added to the list of shows that made me cry. But after a certain point, I couldn't see it ending any other way. This was certainly a journey. I really didn't expect this video to be quite this long, and I appreciate anyone who made it this far. Honestly, there were other characters I was planning to discuss in more detail that ultimately got skipped over. I try not to make these too much of a rambling mess, and as interesting as some of those characters were, they weren't strictly necessary when summing up the story. Thank you, once again, Ninjammer726, for requesting this anime to me. The second season was a little rougher, but I think that's true of any season that has the weight of the conclusion resting on its shoulders. There were just still so many possibilities at the end of the first season, but I loved the characters and all the twists and turns throughout the story. It certainly left an emotional mark. It really is up there as one of my favorite anime. I expect I'll be rewatching it in the future. Thank you for watching.